Hello, and welcome. This is a Journeyman's Travels, and my name is Daniel Scheifler, Principal Consultant with Improving. Welcome. Now, we've been going through the effective executive during this season on the podcast, and we just talked about the chapter about making one's strengths productive. But let me ask you, what's your working style? One of the most prolific composers I'm aware of, namely Mozart, was quoted as having multiple symphonies, each of them a masterwork, in progress at once. Meanwhile, I can accidentally connect different conversations together if I'm even in two different Teams chats at the same time. Kind of makes you feel inadequate, doesn't it? Honestly, though, the more I've researched into this concept of multitasking, the more I realize maybe it's really not all it's cracked up to be. And definitely not for me. I've seen some statistics suggesting that multitasking can be as destructive as being on weed for your productivity. Now, of course, I'll have to go find the quote for that. But multitasking is a pretty contentious issue. And so when we get to this chapter from Drucker on first things first, he's really not all talking about whether you should multitask or single task. In fact, for him, it's a pretty much an answered deal. Most executives don't do better by working on more than one or two critical things at once. And the ones who are working on two definitely cannot handle three of real meaty topics. Now, of course, remember, by this point in time, he's already been helping us with our time management and weeding out what is truly not important. So we shouldn't be talking about I'm doing this, and then I'm prepping this report and doing that meeting. Like, all of that's just the day-to-day, keep-it-going work. He's talking about the real, heavy-lifting, value-added knowledge work that only the executive can do. And so this first things first chapter is less on first principles thinking, boiling it down to the atomic units for reasoning about this, and more about priorities. Now, of course, based upon time management, you'll remember that he talks about there being this minimum quanta of time needed to get a task done. And as a result, very few people can perform more than 3 major tasks simultaneously, save Mozart. But we, 100% as being regular human beings, should not expect to have executive Mozarts available to us, much less for us to be one. And so therefore, for the rest of us, we have to set priorities. Now, of course, that's really not that hard. Oh yeah, this is the most important, then this, and then this. But let's be honest, we all know that's not all there is. Because just as important of choosing what is most important, we must also choose what we will no longer work on, so that we may guard the time, the minimum quanta, to get the important ones done. That means setting a posterity. I will no longer do the thing. But that's a scary thing to say, isn't it? Right? I am no longer going to work on X. That feels like a unilateral statement that I shall no longer handle this responsibility. As a leader, you know sometimes you cannot say that. And so a change in understanding has to be made. So it might be better for us to say, to preserve my energies to work on this big, hairy, audacious goal, I will no longer personally be handling this. And since every time we set a posterity, we're telling someone else that their top priority isn't our top priority, we're having to exercise some very serious courage, not only to say it, but to stick to it, which of course means we have to say it with some tact. But remember, in a leader's toolkit, there's not just the words in the conversation negotiations that are available. You could also use delegation. You could be accountable for a thing being done and not be the one responsible for doing it. That's already become the case with the individual work. Now it may become the case for other things, and if a thing cannot be delegated, you may have to have the hard conversation of, sir, I have these important things. Which one will I do? Now, of course, when setting the posterity, it's a conversation. And in a sense, it's going to be a negotiation from a middle-level player to someone over their heads, which means you're going to be managing up. And negotiating with your boss is scary! But it's less scary if you can work with the same set of objectives. Asking for what the important thing is and being able to make the connection for what you believe the priorities are to get that important thing and why this other one is not that important. Remember, time's not infinite, right? It's non-replaceable. You can't get more money to replace time. The time is always a fixed size and limited budget. You only got 24 hours a day. So you have to, if you're going to take on a new priority from anyone, cut back to make room for the new one. Because you're not going to just suddenly shrink everything. Certainly some packing will happen over time as you get better and can do something faster. But as an executive, Do you want to be doing the regular, repeatable, tightly packed exercises? Or should we be sending you instead on the strategic? And so before you take on any new thing, have a conversation with the person assigning you the new thing. What should be given up? Because this creates the habit then of trimming the waste that allows you to create the space for truly excellent delivery. This systematic sloughing off of the old can be a little hard at first. If your boss comes at you and says, well, what do you mean you need to take some things off? He's probably going to expect you to have some answers of the things you think no longer matter, because you are going to have to push back and state, we cannot have infinite wants. We have to pay for it somehow. So try using this question. If I were not already doing whatever the thing was, would we attempt to start it up today? And if the answer is no, not really, that's a candidate for being dumped and stopped immediately so you can cut off the waste. And if you need to think of other places, consider looking into lean manufacturing and the 7 wastes of lean, like overproduction, excess movement, etc. And they'll give you some ideas in your own process to help you find them, right? So before ever accepting a new something, slough off the old. That is a way that you can negotiate expectations in a logical and fair manner. You want to deliver, right? I'd be happy to take this on. Can you please help me identify some of those things that I'm already doing, which are lower priority, so I can stop them to make room for this? Now, that's as the individual being assigned work. What about as the leader? Well, if you're going to delegate something to someone, like that thing that you need to slough off, remember, you may need to relieve your team members of their old burdens to make way for the new stuff, which means relieving them of some of the things they are likely good at to make things for the way that they are best at. It may mean that some of your senior developers aren't doing as much coding anymore because you need them working on designs with the younger generation. Now, critically with this, when dealing with setting priorities, sometimes we get into this kind of failed mindset of, no, you have to keep that on because you need to earn for it the market that it deserves, or the success that it deserves. No product, no initiative deserves a market, deserves success. It earns it. The market, the reward, is from the experiment that tells us which products, which initiatives were worthy. So any organizational effort that isn't succeeding, just kill it. Now, this is going to run right along into one of those base troubles that most organizations have. No organization wants to ever admit someone made a mistake. We gotta. Because otherwise we're going to be stuck paying for yesterday's bad decisions with more of today's money. Now, it doesn't mean that all the ideas are necessarily bad, but that the results tell us whether the context, the idea, and the process for executing might have failed, and it's okay. You gotta let it go because it didn't work this time. But don't just keep throwing good money after bad. Now, with that, very often, when we're trying to find the way to get real change in our organization, our issue isn't creativity. People will totally be able to come up with new ways to deal with a thing. The problem is that with all those good ideas, we seldom have the time to pursue them. Right? And cutting out this waste creates the space for us to actually pursue the real good, meaningful change ideas. We got to get a lot of stuff out of the way first, because it's not easy to create change. Here, Drucker references some good companies to look at, like DuPont, at the time of writing, had a process for discarding and abandoning any effort, product, or process before the process began to decline. Can you imagine that for a minute? You're watching the balance sheet. It's going up and to the right, and at some point, an executive says, yeah, that's a good product. We're going to kill it now and move on to the next thing. What? This thing is just hitting its stride. It's generating a ton of money. Yeah, but how do you create space for the next thing that's going to continue to build the company if you don't kill things when they hit a plateau? Certainly the plateau is good, and we wish we had the infinite energy machine. But beware of this product built this company, and so it is our duty to maintain for it the market that it deserves. There's that word again. The product doesn't deserve a market. It has earned a market. But the world isn't standing still. Consider how often a new computer chip comes out. I think it's every 5 years now? And before, Moore's Law was saying every 2.5 years we were going to double in computing power. The world is no longer standing still and really has only accelerated its pace of change. We've heard it all over the place. The only way a company can keep up is to pursue a more agile step, which means cutting out the waste, cutting out the fat, and making certain that when we see a product as being successful, being willing to cut it to go create the new one, because that's the only way for us to continue to live. Otherwise, we are dooming ourselves to a slow, sad march down to the sea. Oddly enough, I'll offer the remark here, right? Creativity is not our problem. Sometimes it's just applied in the wrong place. This product deserves a market. Well, that's certainly a creative approach of you. We must sternly guard our time to work on what is important. We only got the one life. And sometimes that means we have to abandon the things that are being productive so we can pursue the thing that is most important next. So we can build. I'm not expecting endless peaks. I'm not expecting every effort to be successful, but the bad ones we really shouldn't hold on to. It requires concentration for us to be able to make a meaningful impact. We have to impose on time our decision from the past of what is and is not important, not worth our time. That is a discipline, pure and simple. Setting posterities, those things I will no longer work on, is almost more important than selecting the things that are important to work on. Partly because if you don't stick with the posterity, you eat the time that would eat and create the important space for working on your priorities. What you neglect might turn out to be the triumph for your competitor. There is not going to be a guarantee, and so it is terrifying. But it is also, therefore, the place where we can work and practice the very judgment and the trust that the organization must develop in the future generation of executives. This is fundamentally the way that an individual can practice key decision-making before the fate of the company is in their hands. This is a way for us to offer and to practice individually, even at as low a level as just a senior contributor, the basic, key, main value of an executive: decision-making and judgment call. And we would rather than make a bunch of judgment calls in small scale that a few, and perhaps many more of them than usual, might be bad calls, while it's small and easy to fix, then when they get to be in the C-suite and they have no practice at this, no thank you. So as a result, as a leader in any company, you actively want every one of your employees and every one of your teams practicing the kind of thinking of what is a priority, what is a posterity, and how do I stick with it. Now, certainly, you're not going to trust everyone with X must be, right? That's silly. You're going to give to each according to their ability, but you want them all critically thinking about the basic decisions and actions under their control, with the assumption and the encouragement to pursue excellence as they pursue their objectives. And of course, as they grow in experience, you'll want them practicing thinking about those meaningful decisions, which is an interesting segue into the next chapter of The Effective Executive. And so for now, I wish you fellow travelers a safe journey, and I want to leave you with another question to think on. What is the most basic way to guard the time from your posterities to preserve your priorities? What can you do this week to make your priorities more effective? Thank you very much for joining me on this Journeyman's Travels. Safe journeys, fellow travelers.